Good evening. My name is Ted Fields. I'm with the City of Somerville Economic Development Division. My pleasure to welcome you to tonight's 90 Washington Street Civic Advisory Committee meeting to review the leasing process for 90 Washington Street in East Somerville. This meeting is being recorded on Zoom. And I'm going to launch right into a roll call of the assembled committee, starting with Bill Mahaney. Are you present?
Present.
Thank you. Alex Taylor, present.
Yes, present.
Paolo DeFabio, present.
Present.
Shelley Calder, present.
Yes, present.
Thank you. Lindsay Allen, present.
Present.
Councillor Wheeler, present.
Present.
Thank you. Zach Wilson, present.
Yep.
Great. J.R. D'Oliveira, present.
Present.
Rory Collins, present.
Present.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. We are going to move to the second item on the agenda, which is a debrief of last week's interviews with the two applicants in the 90 Washington Street request for proposals process. And I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Ben Demers. Ben, take it away.
Thanks, Ted. Hi, everyone. Ben Demers here, Senior Planner also in Economic Development. So going to walk through a couple of things this night. Just let me have a moment to share screen. I might need permission, Ted.
Yeah. All right, you're good.
Thank you. Okay. I'm just going to start this with a quick check-in on like where we are in the overall planning schedule as we've been doing. And hold on one second. I'm just going to make sure I can see everyone's face. Okay, perfect. So this is the schedule that we have been following for this review process for the responses to the 90 Washington Street RFP. So just to remind folks where we are, at this point, we've completed about half of the schedule after proposals came in. So we are obviously here this evening on May 5th. The goal this evening is to finalize the CAC's recommendations to the City Council and the Redevelopment Authority around the two proposals that we received to the 90 Washington Street RFP. So for this evening, for the flow, we can start by debriefing the interviews that we had last week. And then I'm also going to take a bit of time to talk about some of the feedback and review that's going on with HRNA and with city staff, kind of simultaneous with the CAC process. And then we can turn to the draft memo that I shared for this evening, which is really meant to encapsulate the feedback that we heard in our first meeting after we had received responses and kind of refine the language there to make sure that CAC members feel like it accurately reflects kind of what we discussed, also make updates based on the interviews, other conversations you've been having, etc. Any questions on that flow for the evening? Cool. I'm going to also just really quickly, so it's kind of fresh in everyone's head, bring up the comparison between the two, the programs of the two proposals that we received. So we have Wood Partners on the left and then North River Leering LLC on the right. And so just as a reminder, for Wood Partners, it's one 7-story building that encompasses 324 residential units, 65 of which are income restricted, so 20% based on Somerville's IZ policy. And then a couple of other notes here about our the retail strategy, the parking proposed, etc. And then on the right, you'll see North River Leering's proposal. And again, this has been updated slightly based on the updated visuals and program that they shared during their interview. So this is 3 buildings that range from 6 to 16 stories. And these buildings comprise 426 units. So 20% of that for the IZ policy would be about 86 units. And then as we discussed a bit, they're recommending 200 parking spaces, an art space, a central open space. And you can see here the two site plans that they each included in their proposals in their presentation. So I want to shift us into just debriefing a bit. We'll talk about the actual like how this all gets wrapped up in the summary memo or summary document later. We just want to spend some time debriefing the interview processes and what y'all took away from those interviews. So I'm going to shift. So similar to last time, I'm just going to be taking notes live. I'm going to make this a little larger. Figure again, we can start with Wood Partners and then shift into talking about North River Lyric. But also, if there's something that stood out comparatively and you want to talk about both of them, happy to incorporate that into the notes. Does anyone want to share anything from the Wood Partners proposal or interview that stood out? Lindsay.
They did seem very receptive to the parking concerns, and the parking ratios. It sounded like it wasn't just from the advisory committee. It sounds like they heard this from a lot of folks. So I was, I guess, happy to hear that that was something that they would be flexible on.
Yeah, and I will say I asked them about where else they were hearing that, and they mentioned just from, I think as soon as the proposals were posted, they started to be posted on Reddit and different things online, and so the development team was seeing that they were getting a lot of comments specifically on that portion of the proposal.
Great. Does anybody else have any comments on the Wood Partners interview? All right. I don't see any, Ben. Do you want to move on to?
I just threw
North
mine
River?
in the chat.
Oh, okay. All right. Hello. You said in the chat you appreciated how their entire operation was in one shop for Wood Partners.
Zach.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to throw, so also I should say take this with a grain of salt because I wasn't at the last meeting, but I did watch the recording today. And I sort of got the opposite impression about the parking concerns. Like I did hear them say like, "Oh yeah, we're open to reconsidering it," but like they didn't really say too much about how they would do that. They didn't talk. I think what I heard more of was about like, "Oh, we can like lower the number of floors in the parking structure," or that was really the only thing that I remember off the top of my head. I didn't hear too much about like, yes, this parking ratio is like way, way, way too much for something that's adjacent to a T-stop. It kind of seemed like they were like, well, we're going to do what we have to do in order to sell this the way that we want to. So I don't know. I wasn't super thrilled with the response to the parking thing, but again, I wasn't there, so I'm just kind of going off the recording.
Yeah,
Great. Anyone else? Oh,
Well,
sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, I was there, and I share the same idea that Zach can't. That in effect, they did respond that it would be possible to lower the number of floors or cut back the scale or size of that parking structure. But again, without a more clear response and detail in terms of the way they, where the number came from in terms of the ratio was never clear to me, and the ability to recalculate that or rethink it based on our policy of having much lower uh, scale of parking to numbers of units, et cetera, in a transit zone. I didn't get the sense that they were, open to sort of rethinking the whole underlying set of calculations there.
Sure. Yeah, and I guess this doesn't like counter what you're saying. One of the things that they mentioned was it's like a precast garage structure, which I think there was an economic incentive, so it allowed like it was a cheaper option that I think allowed for a greater financial offer. So I think that was part of why they described going with that option, but definitely hear what you're saying from the site planning perspective. Councilor Wheeler.
Councilor Wheeler.
Thanks, and I appreciate everyone giving some of us a chance to gather thoughts. Yeah, I had also flagged the prefab, pre-structured garage as something that they had mentioned makes their plan not terribly flexible and not really able to be revised, especially around the possibility of adding more housing. They, mentioned a loose possibility of maybe one more story, uh, noting that 8 floors is the max with wood frame construction. And talked about another building they built at Assembly, and the possibility around using that extra piece of land in the sort of southeast. But they acknowledged that the parking structure really restricts their choices. It's too bad, and I understand that reduces cost a lot to use this pre-existing structure and that you need a lot of ramps and things. I think it's a design aspect that limits the total value to the city. Uh, yeah, that's my only thoughts for the moment. Thanks.
All right, JR.
So I was under the impression that wood, especially because of the parking layout, and it resembles more like a garage building than necessarily a residential, due to the amount of parking on that. I see that their solution, it feels to me it's more like a Band-Aid situation rather than a master plan where residential was in the forefront of their thought process. So those are the only remarks that I have.
Thank you. All right. I see no other hands.
Yeah,
Anybody have?
I think.
Oh,
Yeah.
Alex, go ahead.
sorry, yeah, my brain's catching up. I'm a bit winded over here, recovering from COVID and stuff. I'm glad you all had some stuff to say first. My brain is now basically caught up. Yeah, so effectively, the previous slide we have here, slide 4, it looks like, we're still looking at this. Regardless, maybe it's not an 8-story parking structure, maybe it's 7 or 6, but like effectively, it's still this, monolithic building with a private pool and a huge parking structure. And Counselor, I think you noted the 8-floor limit on wood construction. That, yeah, I also wish there'd be able to be more housing options here. Prioritize that for 100 years in the future, whatever we're planning for this site. I thought their answers to some of the other questions were good. I appreciate that they have everything in one house, as it was mentioned earlier. But yeah, I just can't get over the bird's eye view here comparison, I guess.
Paulo.
Thank you. Appreciate your patience while I got off the train. I just wanted to add that while I did appreciate that it was everything under one shop, this group also seemed to, at least in their presentation of who they were, have more of a local flavor to them. All that said, I find their design highly flawed and lacking any kind of appreciation for cohesive marrying with the existing community, or at least trying to establish something that doesn't feel as if it was just dropped in there in a very kind of industrial feel. And I know it's obviously initial rough sketches, but to echo what others have said, it really does feel like a parking structure that happens to have residential buildings around it, and didn't really meet many of the objectives of what we sort of set out. So while I kind of enjoyed their personality at the beginning of it, I didn't really find much substance in the presentation that moved beyond the initial sketch, or as we were saying, a really strong willingness to reconsider either elimination of the central parking structure or exploration of underground, as Alex has flagged before, without, as they said, absorbent cost, kind of like shutting that off to be like, well, if we did that, it's an entirely different price point that likely would require a wholly new redesign. So unfortunate, but I think definitely lacking.
I do want to just make one comment to make sure. I know that with North River, they presented additional visuals that were not included in the original, but just to make sure this is clear, the expectation that we had set with the development team was not for them to show anything in the interview that had not been included in their initial proposal. So I just want to call that out. Like they included the same graphic because like their intention was to show what they had initially proposed, just in case that's being read in any way as like not being responsive to initial feedback.
No, I mean, just to initially comment on that, I don't view it as not responding to initial comment, but there was an opportunity to get a little deeper into it.
Sure.
And I think especially knowing, as they mentioned, not just from us, but from others, the issue around parking, to at least examine or have potential discussions of alternatives. And they didn't really. So
yeah,
it's kind of like, if you want our proposal, it's going to be built around a parking structure, which is not going to sit well with anybody.
Right. Bill Valletta.
Yeah, I want to jump in here with the form of building that they're doing with the parking in the middle and the wrapped around is basically Assembly Square. The residential buildings at Assembly Square are basically all the same. And the new building over on, what is it, 25 Innerbelt is exactly the same scheme with the parking garage attached to the building and the elements of the residential. So, I'm not all that unhappy or disappointed with them presenting that as an urban, solution to the problem of how you do an urban block in a place like Somerville, and it's certainly been acceptable elsewhere around town. I think from my perspective, the place where the Woods proposal falls short, to me, is too much parking. It's inconsistent in my opinion in two of the fundamental ideas that Summervision put into place 17 years ago, that is supposedly guiding our planning here in the city. One is that the transit station districts are going to be the place where we put our maximum density and our maximum, numbers of units, et cetera. So that when I first saw the two proposals 3 weeks ago before last week's discussion, what hit me was one said up to 600 and the other one said 324. And so, I was sold already that we want more housing. So I was kind of less happy last week when the up to 600 got lowered down to 400. And the difference between the two seemed to me not to, again, we're moving in the direction of inconsistency with Summervision as opposed to consistency with it. So, I just to put back in this idea that in fact, the form and the design type of structure and the marrying of an above ground parking with housing is to me a perfectly acceptable kind of form to use in the city of Somerville. If they had come in with, I think, a taller elements and a lot more housing, I'd be in favor of them at this point.
All right. Anybody else have comments on Wood Partners' interview? and proposal.
Okay.
Great.
So we can shift down to North River Lyric. So I noted the comment that you just made, Bill, around a disappointment in the decrease in the number of residential units. So initially they had said 600, and then they refined their program a bit in the period between submitting their proposal and then presenting. And so they were showing a number of 426 units and still noting a 20% inclusionary set aside. So that would be 85 or 86 units. Are there any other comments or any other kind of plus ones to Bill's point? Lindsay?
I liked their openness with the retail space. They kind of had presented these specific grocers and said, "Hey, we're open to other ideas, and we really want to work with the community." And I felt that part was very promising.
Shelley.
I was just going to say with North River, I mean, I just liked how, again, they brought in, I know we like the other that everything was in-house, but I also really appreciated in the other group sort of how they had looked externally and really tried to get, the leads of the project, et cetera, folks that were, had a really thoughtful approach to building in a community. And I also, thought it was really good how they pointed out like they're already invested in our neighborhood and it would only behoove them to further invest, right? Like that it would make their investment even worth more. So I feel like they are sort of bought into this area already. So that was a positive for me.
All right, great. Zach.
Definitely agree with both those points. And I think what I mostly wanted to say was similar to Lindsay, but a little bit broader. I think it was for me not just the community engagement on like the retail, but community engagement like all across the board. I feel like they were very, very responsive to the like concerns that we had at the meeting before the interview when we made some comments like oh, it's kind of hard to understand what their vision is. Maybe there could be some drawings. Um, and I just feel like everything that we saw was reflective of um, comments that we had made at the previous meeting. And so, like, in contrast with the previous developer, it really feels like if we go with this one, like, I trust them a lot more in terms of willingness to listen to the concerns of the community. And I also just have to call out that, like, I don't think I don't think it really occurred to me until Alex pointed it out, but I think this was the first time that we'd seen the two visuals side by side, and there just does seem to be a really stark difference between what is in essence a lot of housing surrounded by like a kind of community park and a lot of housing surrounded by a parking garage and to a lesser extent a private pool. And it just really feels like they are looking to serve the community, like the whole community, and not just the people that live there. And to me, that's kind of a no-brainer in terms of which option we want to go with.
Great. JR, and then Alex.
Okay. So it was already mentioned the fact that it was reduced from 600 to 426. That sort of caught me off guard a little bit because we have indicated that we had the appetite for more rather than less. But so that is, I was in the beginning sort of hesitant with the fact that they didn't submit designs and but I guess at the end, I believe they did their homework and they presented a real fine. So that gives us some guidance, I believe. Um, I like very much their ground level parking approach, much better than in line with what we expected, I believe. I think overall, I think this project is a different level. It's another level. And I believe that our neighborhood deserves something that reflects that you know that quality. I believe. So those are more my remarks on that.
Great. Alex, then Paolo, then Counselor Wheeler.
Yeah, thanks. I just now noticed the hand button. Sorry if I was ignoring that previously. I thought their response to questions 5 and 6, the ground floor retail and how it ties into existing developments. I was expecting kind of a generic, uh, not very useful answer. Just paying lip service to community values and whatnot. But their answer was, to use a phrase JR used. I don't think it didn't seem to me like they had just done their homework. It seems to me like almost like they live around here or regularly visit the area. They had examples of what the neighborhood could use, some of which I had not brought up or really thought of myself. The central courtyard there, the park, they described how they had designed the angle and the height of the building, especially the one on the west, to maximize the amount of sunlight the central area would get, and different ways you can access that central area. It just seems like they thought of so much. It just overall seemed thoughtful, I guess, and a little more. Maybe I'm just jaded, big developers and whatnot, but it seemed more human than I was expecting. Yes, it's just people answering questions to a committee that they want to a contract from, but it yeah, I don't think it was just homework. I guess it seemed like more than that to me, like a real understanding.
All right, great. Paolo, and then Counselor Wheeler.
Thanks. Um, yeah, I was pretty skeptical of this presentation going in, again, because of the lack of the visuals. I've made it clear in previous meetings throughout this process about how I feel about um, taller buildings in the area. And even in the initial sort of introductions of their team, the sense that contrast to Woods, that they were from all over the place. It wasn't all in one shop. It just seemed like there'd be a lot of bureaucracy in that, a lot of skepticism. And then I saw the presentation, and I mean, I'm incredibly impressed and echo everything that was just said from the sense of its um, attention more in community, on creating something really unique for this neighborhood, on an investment that has connection to other areas that they're looking to develop. Um, Even the sense of using brick to be true to the neighborhood's history, um, uh, doing its best it can to preserve a connectivity to the Cobblewood Hill area that is seamless. And to Alex's point, I agree. A humanity and a sort of care and consideration that superseded my concerns of it being sort of out of staters and all these different areas and different companies. Um, I do have concerns about their ability to achieve that in the footprint that they have, because man, they're looking to pack a lot into that, which is why, to the point, while it hasn't been spoken, I wonder if that's why the numbers have dropped, is because 600 was on a higher aspirational thing. When they've actually looked at the pragmatics of it, they realized they just can't fit that many units in that space with the staggered tower design, which also I appreciate the sunset aspect of it and keeping the south side a little lower to preserve natural light in the courtyard and not just make it a shadowed courtyard. Um, it's night and day. This project is far more considerate to the objectives of what we set forward, to the needs of the community, and to building something that is legacy enriching for generations to come. It was very impressive, and I'm saying that as someone who is incredibly skeptical of their presentation right up until when they started showing the renderings.
All right, thanks, Paolo. Counselor Wheeler, and then Bill Mahaney.
Thank you, Chair. Um, Echoing a lot of what other people have said and a lot of what Paolo just said, I also felt there was a lot that I really liked in this design and this presentation. Um, the the primary orientation of the architecture and the floor plan and the ground plan felt very clearly oriented towards how can this accommodate a lot of people living there, and also be something that everybody in the neighborhood gets something from and is able to participate in a meaningful way. Paolo highlighted the not just being next to Cobble Hill, but opening up towards Cobble Hill, with that green space and the trees there, rather than having some kind of barrier. I think that's really meaningful. The team mentioned having lines of sight into the inner green space, which I think is a really meaningful detail that I really appreciated hearing because you can have something nearby you that's great, but it doesn't feel like it's for you. And the archway, having those spaces be intentionally broad and inviting and something that people from the neighborhood who don't live there will feel like they are invited to come and participate in. I think that's really meaningful. Um, in the session, I stuck to the script and to our questions. The question that I had was about proportion and types and subsidy rates for affordable housing, but seeing the decrease from that up to 600 to just 426, I really would like to ask about what it would take for their design to accommodate more people. As a couple other members of the committee mentioned, this is a great transportation location. It's, a couple minutes from the Green Line. It's a 10-minute walk from the Orange Line. It's on buses. Like, if we want to build the future that we want in this city and in this region, this is exactly the kind of place where we want to put a lot of people. Because otherwise, people are going to be in towns nearby us driving all the way through Somerville, making traffic worse, polluting the city more. Um, this is the direction we got to go, given how many people want to come be in this area. And I would really like to see more housing here, and I think that's something I'll really look forward to in the best and final offer part of the process. Thanks.
Thank you. Bill Mahaney.
Oh, could you put that slide number 4 up? The two slides ago, the comparison. This is generally they're both similar in that you see how there's a road going from Washington Street to New Washington Street. Both Wood Partners and North River have a road, correct? In their diagram.
Yeah, they didn't give a lot of descriptive. So I will say the North River team didn't give a ton of descriptive detail on this, but they both do appear to have a comparable access drive through the center of the site. Yes.
Okay, as far as that goes, this is from the Cobble Hill and mitigating the damages. Cobble Hill's concerned about that emergency entrance of fire trucks and ambulances and the trash pickup in the back of 84 and the possible preservation of the berm, which seems to be accommodated in both of these. And the trees, they've put trees in both diagrams. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Shelley Calder, and then Bill Valletta, and then J.R. D'Olivero.
Super. Thanks. I just wanted to add a few more things that I had thought of after everyone. First up, I also they talked about their relationship with Brick Bottom, and I think Bill also sort of conferred on that that was a good working relationship as well when the building went up beside Brick Bottom. So that was a plus to me, as well as their mention of subsidizing businesses that went into there to really be able to try to, again, create community. I think they said they were subsidizing the coffee shop and that a brewery was coming as well. And then the other thing that I thought was important that they said near the end was about, we can all have our desires of what we would like to do, but it's important to be transparent about the actual cost and the decision making around it. And I do think that I appreciated that comment because, again, we may want more housing, but then what does that change in relation to the cost? So I think kind of working in a transparent space so that we're all sort of accountable to our requests on both sides, I thought was a good point. That it's not just that, the developers can't do this. It's helping us all understand, what does that look like?
Great. Thanks. Bill Valletta.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate my agreement with most of what's been said in the last 4 or 5 speakers in terms of their, understanding that the North River folks, have are paying close attention to what's happening in the surrounding area here. I mean, they have their building and they're trying to rent up the retail space. They're in the market right now trying to find tenants and that sort of stuff. So they know what's going on, and their sensitivity and understanding of what we're demanding, I think, is they're they're on top of all of that, and it's a problem that they're wrestling with right now, and that's why we're getting good sort of um, uh, uh, discussion from them. I want to throw a bit of cold water on on the open space. It's a good design, and it's certainly a workable kind of a form of having residential sort of wraparound a consolidated open space that's in the middle of it. There's a number of existing projects in the area that already have that kind of a form. Maxwell's Green over in off of Broadway, I believe it is, has that. Also down on Binney Street near Kendall Square, the Kendall Square apartments look almost exactly like what they're proposing here. My sense of that is it doesn't work as public space, no matter how inviting and how well designed it is, etc. And so, to me, Cobble Hill has a lovely central open space with a little gazebo on it and flagpoles, and it's got it looks like a town green there and is always very inviting, etc. And I've lived there for 25 years, and I don't think I've ever seen anybody in there using it. I cross it once in a while myself because I visit, folks I know over at Cobble Hill, and it's really pleasant and lovely. But there it is, sitting there, very inviting and very charming. And it's for 25 years. So putting another one on the same block to me is all right. It's great. It's fine, but I wouldn't be too over enthusiastic about it. And for me, it's it's an important part of what they're proposing here. But my favorability with this project is solely resting on the fact that it's going to provide it's going to provide more units. And I'm with Councilmember Wheeler that we ought to be exploring maybe with both of them whether more housing in fact can be put onto the site without knocking over all of the appropriate aspects of design and scale.
Thank you, Bill. Any other comments at this time?
I just put one in the chat to respond to Bill V's comment.
Sure. Do you want to state that out loud?
Yeah, sure. Bill, I think that's an excellent point. I hadn't really thought of. There are plenty of green spaces that around the community that we don't really understand as regular people walking by that are that either there or available for our use. I wouldn't walk by Cobble Hill and assume that I'm necessarily welcome if there isn't a sign saying, come on, use our walking paths or whatever. So I'd like to get the developers' thoughts on, yes, this is free. You're never going to deny somebody from coming in here, but how, other than, the farmers markets and other, art fest little things they've suggested people use this for, how else are they going to encourage people to use this space to make it really what, I mean, we've seen how thoughtful they can be in their apparent nature of presenting this, but how would they follow through on this? Would they put signs on the little walkways, in the building, the different access routes, like community welcome, or come see our pollinator garden, or what would it be?
Yeah, it's an interesting, that question has plagued the POPS, the publicly open, publicly, what they call it, the pops.
Privately owned public space.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, we had 254 of them in New York, 20 years ago when I was at city planning, and it was the same problem. How do you invite people in? And they're always perceived as private spaces, and to a large extent, no matter what you do, another issue with the public space is unless you have to cross through them. If you think about the great piazzas of the world, the Piazza Navonas and et cetera, the great architectural spaces that we all love and go to visit as tourists. The thing that sort of makes them work is they're open air rooms and they're fed by 4 or 5 different pathways. And so they force people to come in, and it's not just coming in, but it's a crisscrossing. People come and go, and there's a mingling and a kind of, you meet your neighbors and that sort of stuff. That's why public spaces work as great public places. And, on Washington Street and because New Washington is a dead street, and it's going to continue to be a dead street because it's got the rail tracks along it, and, there just is never going to be anything on the other side of it. The Washington Street traffic, the pedestrian traffic goes down the sidewalk to the subway station, and then when it's 5 o'clock when people come home, it goes the other way. And so consequently, no matter what you do, if you look at I was unhappy with the design of the Woods project because it put its little piazza on the corner there of Washington and New Washington, which nice place for it, and I'm sure they would design it quite pretty, et cetera. But again, the pedestrian traffic is going to go past it. They're going to stay on the sidewalk, and you don't kind of veer off into a public space. You just don't. That's sort of human nature, I think. And so again, unless a space is a crisscross space, to me, the public idea about it generally, my experience over all the years as a planner is that they don't work.
Thank you. Any other comments? Oh, I see a hand. 1 second.
It's Paolo.
Paolo, go ahead.
I echo Alex's point of, I think these are good questions to bring up to them in a best and final. So for example, do they envision some of the ground floor retail space being abutting the public space so that some of those, cafes or whatnot would actually allow for customers to be in that public courtyard? Or is it only residential sort of in the inner oval that, to Bill's point, is less inviting for the public to think that it is an area that they can use? And then also, to what integration does the public spaces, the community spaces, do they also sort of naturally feed into that courtyard to, again, invite an awareness and education that is a space that people can use? I think the other thing that should be considered, especially if it is residents in the inner circle, is security. That the unfortunate thing is if that is an open courtyard 24/7, it could also invite bad actors to misbehave in that space. So is there a way in which is it closed during certain hours? Is it open all the time? And then just sort of open to whatever occurs at whatever time of night. So I think since Bill has invited the conversation about the downsides of the open space, I think those are other things to keep in mind. But how do you educate the public to it, and how do you protect the residents from it being sort of an invitation to misbehavior?
JR.
That is a very valid concern. I was refraining from commenting on that, but if it is a space designed for children, for instance, okay, it's one thing because you foresee that the use with that kind of mentality. If it's an open space and that you invite, especially at night, security becomes a very relevant issue, in my view.
I will just make a note quickly. Obviously, there would, the process of determining how public the civic space is, like on whether or not it's functionally like a courtyard space that is accessible to the public versus what kinds of agreements we have in place to ensure public access. That would definitely impact some of these questions around whether the space could be used at night. So, if you think about some of the cities' privately owned public spaces, like so if you think of the plaza area next to 10 to 50 Prospect Street in Union Square, so like just north of the elevator and the station. So that space is a privately owned actually that was deeded to the city. But in general, if a space is going to be a privately owned public space, there are standards that the city has, and so there will often be standards around hours of access, the same way that there would be for a public park. I can't ensure that that is how this space would work out, just depending on the level of like official publicness it ended up with. But just want to call that out. It's definitely something that we think about a lot from the city staff side.
All right. Any other comments? I don't see any. So I think we're able to move on
Yeah, that sounds good.
Discussing the draft communication by this committee to City Council and the Redevelopment Authority.
Perfect. All right, give me another second to start sharing correctly. Okay, so I do want to get in a second, now that we've had that time for feedback, I want to get in a second to finalizing the draft of the communication that we shared with y'all for the meeting. Going into that, I do also, so the feedback from the Civic Advisory Committee is going to be shared along with feedback from HRNA. So the memo that HRNA originally shared, they've updated it slightly based on the interviews. And so that was just posted on the website this afternoon. So I wasn't able to share it ahead of this meeting, but if people are interested, there's an updated version that has kind of call outs for what is standing out to them. And then we've also been doing some review internally with city staff just to see kind of how the projects align generally with city goals and standards. I mentioned this in the last meeting. We're not going into the level of review that we would for, zoning compliance. These are concept drawings, so we're trying to see what in the concept might jump out. But the idea is just to see if anything in what they have proposed jumps out. So I did want to just spend a moment to flag some of the things that are kind of coming up in those staff conversations. Again, that's going to be provided with CAC feedback, so it doesn't need to necessarily it doesn't need to be reflected in feedback that the CAC is giving. I think the focus of this group really being, how is the neighborhood reacting and how is it responding or corresponding to the priorities that this group outlined for the RFP. But just want to flag some of the things that have been coming up. Okay. I'm back sharing screen. Yeah, good. So in terms of the Wood Partners proposal, so a lot of what's been mentioned, and these are just like some quick excerpts. This is going to be, we have communication that's going to the Redevelopment Authority and to the City Council. And so this is going to be included as a appendix essentially in that communication. Some of what's coming up for the Wood Partners proposal. So as we've discussed in this group, parking has definitely been a major concern of staff when they saw this proposal. And I know I apologize, these are going to be kind of text heavy slides because I was just pulling some of the text, but parking is definitely a concern. So the proposal would definitely benefit from reducing the number of parking spaces. And then staff have also mentioned that the development team might also explore orienting the garage differently on the site to see if it enables greater site efficiencies. And I'll call out that really the way that we're trying to frame this is, what can be improved about both proposals. So there's a comparative element, but it's also about, especially as we're thinking about giving them the chance to make updates to these proposals, what are we looking for in those updated offers, so that we as staff can clearly communicate that to the development teams. So parking is definitely standing out as a concern. And then around open space, so the proposal doesn't create significant new open space that is easily accessible to the public. So a lot of the spaces that they showed are kind of on top of the podium, so the pool space that we've talked about, and those two kind of cutouts from the facade along Washington Street. So also proposing that the development team might consider adding additional public space, public open space that's accessible from Washington or New Washington Street, such as the southwest edge of the site, so kind of where that pool structure is currently. And I'm gonna, so, thinking about this edge and the benefits of southern facing civic spaces that have better light. And this was something that I believe Alex actually mentioned a couple meetings ago, but also thinking about, we have these different cutout spaces for amenity spaces that are on top of the podium. Is there a way, if they are reducing the parking but keeping a similar footprint, is there a way that they might consolidate some of those amenity spaces essentially on top of that garage space? So it's just one idea, but just something that they might be thinking about. As you all have mentioned, also the proposal is fairly conservative in the number of residential units it includes compared to what the capacity might be for the high-rise zoning. So they might consider adding additional density. And then I don't have the facade visual from the RFP, but the development team referenced the desire to break up the facade of the building in their interview. That's part of why they have those sort of cutouts that create the three podiums. And there might be some site efficiencies in that, by which I mean they might be able to fit more residential units because they're creating that structure. But this is also something that other projects often do by using different building materials to create the sense of additional buildings. So just one thing that staff call out is probably going to warrant greater discussion with the Urban Design Commission if this project goes forward. Alex.
Yeah, thanks for putting that together, as well as everything else you put together over the long time we've been doing this. Yeah, I did mention the amenities on top of the garage. Another thought I had, and I think I expressed about that, was concern that even if they were to do so, it's hard to imagine, and going back to Bill Valletta's point today, as difficult as it already is to get people to use privately owned public space. Nobody's going to go on top of a garage. Nobody's going to have any clue that there's green space up there, other than maybe not even people who live there. I mean, who's going to take an elevator or walk 6 or 8 flights, or whatever, stairs to go up there? I mean, I'd like to see what they could do with it. Maybe there is something useful, but like it's just hard to imagine any green space elevated that high up is going to be a nightmare to keep green and not just
Sure.
derived from the wind. Yeah.
Yeah. And I will say, so the framing of the feedback is more around, is there a way to better use the top of the garage to centralize amenity spaces? So space, when I say amenity spaces, I mean primarily spaces that would be intended as private for the residents. And if in doing so, would you open up space? So, this space that is currently given to the pool space, would it open that up for something that's then more public facing along New Washington Street?
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah. And then in terms of the North River Leering proposal, some of what's coming up. So this is kind of similar to what Bill Valletta had mentioned. So the central green space shown in their presentation provides a large green space to residents. It doesn't necessarily read as accessible to the public, just given that it's blocked from view from Washington Street. So something that they call out is maybe widening the entrance to the space between the tower and the adjacent building, or adding design elements that invite in the public, as we've talked about a bit on this call, that would help counter that concern. So, really thinking about how do you make that feel like a space that the public would use. And then something else that we have talked a bit about with our housing team, and I believe this was also referenced in our first conversation. So the North River proposal talks about consolidating the income restricted units in one of the buildings. And this was the building that they had initially called out as being adjacent to Cobble Hill. And so there is some concern with they also mentioned using LIHTC, so low income housing tax credit funding, to fund those income restricted units. So this is the most common and popular form of subsidy that allows for the creation of income restricted housing in the United States. So there is some concern that these programs operate a little bit differently. So when you use LIHTC funding, you need to set essentially your rent levels based on area median income at a certain percentage, versus if you are abiding by the inclusionary zoning policy. So this is the policy that the city uses to create income restricted housing. It sets it at different levels. So there's some kind of programmatic concerns with how that would be done. And then there's also a concern with just the use of LIHTC funding. So these tax credits, which are an external funding source, in order to essentially create income restricted housing that is supposed to be created because of cross subsidy within the project. So the way that the inclusionary zoning process works, the idea is that the market rate units are cross subsidizing the income restricted units rather than allowing for an additional outside subsidy, which is what LIHTC is. So there's a little bit of a concern that you're making use of both the cross subsidy of the market rate units and the external LIHTC funding, and that LIHTC funding is a finite state resource. So that's been coming up a bit in conversations with our housing team. Paolo.
Sorry, just you going through that list, Ben, reminded me of one thing that I forgot to mention in terms of an aspect of the North River proposal that I combined them. The North River proposal that I really appreciated, and that was their aspiration to do this as close to passive house as possible. That's a huge goal that the city has, the state has, and I think that's a fantastic thing in their favor that wasn't mentioned in the Wood proposal.
Let me I'm just gonna call it out here. Can't remember if there's an E after the B, but and then one other slide. And then one other thing with the North River proposal is related to this same approach. So generally, LIHTC, it can be used for mixed income projects, so it can be used for projects where there's market rate and income restrictions. But the way that they're proposing doing it here is doing all of the income restricted units in one building. So there wouldn't be income restricted units in the other two, which is generally the IZ policy is designed so that the income restricted units are integrated throughout the larger buildings. So there is some concern with that. So again, they just note that the proposal would be strengthened by spreading those income restricted units throughout the buildings. So some of what our housing team has been thinking about. I'm seeing some chats come in, so I'm just going to look at those quickly. Yeah, definitely thinking about, so Alex made a comment kind of related to the civic space piece that like a certain type of arch or something between the two buildings might help invite people in, which could definitely be true. So that's been coming up in the conversations with city staff. I'll also note, so HRNA did some update to their memo. Some things that they noted, so just kind of ongoing concerns from the Wood Partners side, as we've talked about, high volume of parking, lack of detail in the ground floor activation, how like the way that the massing might feel adjacent to Cobble Hill compared to the other proposal, still lower density compared to what high rise might allow, and just in general a need for a clearer public realm strategy. So again, a lot of what we've been discussing in this group. And then for the North River proposal, so with their updated proposal, so they do make a note here that I want to call out, which is, I think Paolo, you kind of made this note around the green space and what the impact of underground parking could be. I think there's some concern that the site design that includes underground parking is somewhat predicated on understanding more from an environmental perspective about the soil, and that's going to come with time and with greater due diligence. And the impact of learning that you can't do underground parking and needing to do that as structured parking somewhere on the site would pretty significantly, obviously, impact the site plan. So there's just some of those concerns around the level of uncertainty with like how feasible the design is, and then what impacts that could have on the overall site plan. And similarly, they call out that having additional buildings here and doing a phased approach that also uses LIHTC, which is an external funding source, it adds some additional procedural timing considerations. So that's what's coming up in those other reviews. Valletta.
All right, Bill.
Yeah, I have a question. Are we making some kind of a recommendation on what the zoning should be in terms of high rise special district, that sort of stuff? Do we have to do that? Is that part of our mandate or what?
It's not part of the mandate of the CAC, from my understanding. The way that the RFP allowed the development teams to think about zoning was they could recommend what zoning approach that they would intend to use, but we're really seeing it as something we're going to be collaborative on them with. So once we have a more refined proposal, Like once a team is selected and then we've gone back and forth with them and refined the program a bit more, then the question becomes, okay, to achieve this program, can we use an existing zoning designation? So could we use the existing high-rise designation? Or, when you're thinking about, for instance, some of these buildings in the North River Lyric proposal, are there specific typologies? So are there dimensions to these buildings that are a little bit different than what we normally allow, but we would want to allow it? And then we would work with their team on more special tailored zoning.
Great. Any other comments from committee members?
Councilor Wheeler.
Thanks. I really appreciate the team's analysis and highlighting some of those points. I was also wondering about, with comparing proposals that may be making different assumptions about feasibility, I want to make sure that we're comparing them fairly and that we're also, taking these possibilities into account. And your point about the underground parking, you know, obviously any plan that doesn't have parking above ground and puts it out of sight is going to look better, and that is definitely a piece of why the North River Rink plan looks better to me. And I know, doing underground parking is considerably expensive. There's a lot of engineering cost to that. There's uncertainty around it. And then there's, soil mitigation issues, which, we don't quite know the extent of, right, on this site. So I do want to acknowledge those things. I appreciate your talking about some of these brass tacks issues. And also, I really appreciate the teams highlighting the entire separation of income restricted units into one building. I'll mention in the Somerville Redevelopment Authority context, that's also a feature of the 299 Broadway development. It's also not my favorite thing in the world about that. So I appreciate that being flagged. I think part of our vision of this being a city and this being a development in the spirit of our broader vision for the city, where people of different incomes and economic levels live side by side. I think that matters. So I appreciate it.
Any other comments? Shelley?
I was just going to ask again, was it 200? Can you put the parking again? Because was it 200 for Northridge?
North River?
200 on, yeah, so it's 200 underground spaces, and then Wood Partners is 398 structured.
So I do think that parking, it's important for us to think about the underground versus above, but regardless, it's still 200 less than the other, whether it's above or below. It's just one thing I would point out.
All right. Any other comments? Thank you, Shelley.
Yeah.
All right.
Sorry, one more. Yeah, on the parking feasibility thing, really glad you brought that up. Yeah, I would hate for this to, in retrospect, turn into one of those things where, the community, the committee, the whoever was sold on a bill of goods that was never realistic in the first place. It'd be really good to, I don't know how long these feasibility studies take or soil studies, whatever, but it's worth doing this right. As many delays as we've had, I think the most important thing is for this to turn out the way the community wants. Voices have been strong. We had a bunch of people show up, not long ago to make some pretty strong comments, all in the same direction, pretty much. And yeah, it would, I think, really suck if the news came out yesterday. News comes out that a partner is selected with underground parking, and then a couple years later, it's built with above ground, and everybody feels betrayed. If there's any way to prevent that eventuality, from happening outside of this committee or community leaders, whatever power after the decision is made, recommendations made potentially to the city, mayor decides, whatever. If there's any way that we can kind of influence that or make that happen, I'd love to hear about it.
Thank you. All right. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry,
Well, sorry, Paolo, go ahead, and then I'll comment back on Alex.
I just have to echo Alex's point because there is a very real example of that with the high school, as the proposal that was approved in that had an underground parking garage underneath that field, and that field does not have a garage underneath that. So that is absolutely a point that Alex brings up that's fair. That would be incredibly devastating if a feasibility study eliminated the possibility of underground parking and totally transformed the proposal that we advised forward.
Yeah, that point is
Uh,
definitely. Sorry, Ted.
no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that point is definitely well taken. That it would be really difficult if somebody is selected, and this is, I mean, this is part of the RFP process where you're selecting somebody at the beginning to kind of commit to them as a development partner, but then obviously they're pitching both themselves as a team, but also certain elements of their proposal, and those elements can change as it's refined. But I think calling out that there are specific pieces like this that you would really hate to see change. I think it's helpful to understand that of like, if structured parking became necessary because the soil conditions were inadequate, like how much that would change how people feel about the proposal, because it's also a question of, how much certainty we're looking for now in as we're selecting one of the two teams to move forward with as a partner versus how much uncertainty you're willing to allow for to then move in with this partner to a due diligence period where they're going to be doing their additional testing, et cetera. But I think that's helpful for us to like hear and understand, that would really change. Obviously, as it was referenced, like it's going to look very different if there's suddenly a parking structure on it. Part of what makes it look nice is that there's not that parking structure at the ground level. But it's helpful for us to hear that articulated.
I do not speak for the community, all the residents of Somerville. I'm just one guy in a panel, but I would not be surprised if we were to poll people to learn that they would rather another month or a couple months delay to ensure that they got the option they wanted, as delayed as this process has been. If you take another study or whatever, we've talked about street feasibility, soil feasibility is another thing. I wouldn't be surprised if they would rather another bit of a delay if it means they get the outcome they want rather than moving forward with something with less certainty. Not that I know how this process works, but yeah.
No, I hear you though.
Thank you. Any other, Council Wheeler?
Thanks. And just to this discussion and to Alexander's points, there's a lot about the process that I still feel a little bit unsure about, just in terms of understanding it. And I could use some help understanding, is there a point at which we are committed to this developer doing a project here without necessarily having firm assurances of different aspects of that project? And if so, I'm not saying then we shouldn't do it. I just feel like I could use some help understanding, are we sort of going into it really, really, really deeply relying on the trust and the history that these developers have in the city, um, or is there a point where there's a plan, we're looking at it together, and we're saying, yes, this specific plan works, or no, this specific plan doesn't work.
Yeah. So previewing a bit of what the process will look like after the selection in July. Um, and again, I know it is a little funky in the RFP process where, there's still things to work out at the time that you're selecting a partner. And like you're selecting a partner, but you're also somewhat selecting a proposal, but things will change. Like it is complicated. Generally, the way that it will move forward is that once a development partner is selected, we enter what is called an exclusive negotiating agreement. So like a period of negotiation with that team. And that time is both to work out the details of the project. So we're going to be kind of getting more accurate site plans, getting more into the feasibility of the program, et cetera. And then in that time, they are also going to be doing their due diligence work. And so that helps to also inform this. And when I say due diligence, also for anyone watching, so this is talking about doing their environmental testing, really doing any of the work that is kind of necessary to be fully informed, get financing, et cetera. So they will go through that process, and then that will end with the development team and the redevelopment authority executing what's called a land development agreement or land development agreement, LDA. And that agreement really locks in a more specific kind of form of the project. There's still zoning review, et cetera. That is generally a step that comes that is then followed by the process of submitting for site plan approval. So submitting to the planning board and going through the more detailed like construction, or it's not construction level, but getting into more detailed drawings. So we will have that due diligence information at the time that we are actually looking to execute a land development agreement with their team.
Thanks so much. It's super helpful.
Yeah.
All right. Last call for comments before we move on. All right. I don't see any.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, Ted. Sorry.
All right. No more comments. Ben, do you want to wrap up this portion before we move on to public comments?
So it won't be wrap up. Like that was the first kind of half of this item, and the central part of this item is really making sure that we all agree on the form of the memo with the feedback. And so obviously that will now be a process where we are live editing that document somewhat to incorporate feedback, just to your general feedback on when you first saw that document, and then now also thinking about our feedback around the interview process, if there's anything else we want to update. I do want to take a moment. Again, I know we've had longer meetings recently. We're at 6:45. This process might take a little bit. I do want to be respectful of time, but does anyone feel like they need like 2-3 minutes to get up, move, rest your eyes for a second and come back? Or do we feel good to move forward?
About how
Looks
much
like
more,
it's good.
about how much more
Yeah.
time do you think we need, Ben?
Let me pull up the document. It really is dependent on how much, I guess, how many changes to the document CSE members want to see. Like, I want to make sure it's something that y'all feel like reflects how you feel about the project. So 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes.
Do members feel like they want to take a quick 2 or 3 minute break, or do we want to forge ahead?
I'm good to keep going.
Forge
Okay.
on.
Let's do it. Okay. So I am going to share screen again to show the draft document that was sent out. See this again? Great. So just as some reminders as we're getting into things, this is meant to kind of gather the range of feedback. So we don't need to agree. Like we can have differing viewpoints in this table. The way that I have structured this is I have the two proposals kind of side by side, and thinking for both proposals kind of highlights or what did we like about it, and then areas for improvement. So as we're thinking about going into the best and final offer period, what would we ask them to update? And this is then split into a couple of different categories. So there's density and general layout, retail and community space, parking and mobility, and then public space and tree canopy, and then development team at the end. So I guess I have some things that we can pull from the feedback that we just gave, but were there any kind of immediate changes that people would want to make to what they reviewed just based on, feeling like it didn't accurately represent what we discussed the first time? Counselor Wheeler?
Sorry, Ben, I feel just a little confused about the process because the format of this, first of all, is just different than the document that I think you're referring to. Uh, I'm not I'm not quite sure if you're saying that there's content here that we just assembled in the notes that you were taking, or if this is all notes from the 28th. I just feel a little confused about what you're
Oh,
asking.
that's okay. So the goal is for this document to, and I just want to make sure you can see the red table on the screen.
Yeah, I would call it a burnt ochre.
Orangish, burnt orange table. So I shared this ahead of the meeting, and the goal is for this draft. The goal is for this document to summarize CAC feedback on the two proposals, and that this feedback is then shared with the City Council and the Redevelopment Authority, along with the city feedback that I mentioned and the HRNA feedback. So it's giving that CAC perspective when the City Council is then deliberating. So what I want to make sure is that, I drafted this based on the initial conversation that we had on the 22nd, but then we had the subsequent interviews and we've had more conversation this evening. So I want to make sure we can make some live updates to this and then feel like this document reflects what we have discussed. I know it's a little tough doing the live editing process. We've done it for other things before, but we can also talk that out now. Counselor.
Sorry if you don't mind. I just want to make sure that I'm looking at the right stuff. I see an email from you, or sorry, from Katie Weiss.
So
No, sorry, no, that's a
that is for
different
the
one.
Redevelopment Authority.
Sorry.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
that's okay. And I
Okay.
apologize. I know you're on both of those groups.
Yes. Sorry. Okay. Then I was looking at one that was about this, but not the one that you're talking about having sent out. And I just want to make sure I'm pulling up the right document. I'm sorry, what day was that? Was that from Ted?
So no, that's okay. So Ted sent an initial message and I sent a follow-up with the draft. So that would have come on
Ah,
Friday.
thank you. I'm seeing it. Yes, with a reminder subject. Thank you.
Of course. So if anybody had a chance to review, is there anything from that initial draft that it doesn't feel like accurately represents what we discussed?
I don't see any hands.
Okay.
Any
And
comment?
then, oh, sorry. I guess I'm going to ask it in a more positive way. Do people feel good about how it encapsulates what we discussed on the 22nd?
Yeah, I mean, I went through it fairly carefully a couple of days ago, and I thought, as a record of what we did on the last week of April there, I thought it was fairly accurate. So
Okay.
I would suggest that what we need to do now is just add in whatever extra paragraphs or make whatever changes in, obviously it made reference to the up to 600, and now that it's 400. We need to reflect that and our reaction to it. But I think we should start tonight's discussion, unless anybody else has some burning issue, with the idea that this encapsulates our thinking as of 2 weeks ago, and our task now is to revise it slightly to incorporate what we learned last week and our reaction to that.
Exactly. Thank you, Bill.
Great. We have Zach Wilson, and then we have Counselor Wheeler.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I don't know if this is really a question or a comment, but I think to me the biggest gap here, and I don't know if this is something we're meant to do or allowed to do, but I think the pros and cons list is pretty accurate, and I don't really have any questions with that. I think what is not clear to me just from this is that, in my view, we all have a pretty clear preference, and I don't think that is really captured anywhere, and I don't think the kind of uh, magnitude of the pros and cons are really captured exactly. And I wonder if there's a way to sort of get like a high level, like in my mind, it's like the wood partners is kind of like almost like we really couldn't recommend it unless they kind of redid it uh, almost entirely, whereas the North River one, we like a lot of it, have a few concerns that kind of would need to be addressed before it's workable. Um, yeah, I just I hope, sorry, I'll stop. But I think that's only my real concern with the document as is.
And I guess I just want to make a comment. Like, I want to gauge if that is the consensus because I mean, I've definitely heard a preference of many members for the North River Lyric proposal, but I've also heard positives about the Wood Partner side. So I want to make sure I understand if there's consensus about what Zach just expressed, that everyone has a strong preference for the North River Lyric proposal. Is there anybody who would not say that?
Well, my thinking is more nuanced. If Woods were to come back to us next week and say we can put 300 more units here, and rejuggle the thing so that we allow more housing on it, then I would switch my preference. I think what's laid out here is I think is quite accurate in terms of our thinking on each of the individual issues. Um, and maybe the way to solve the problem is to add another one more page with a sort of a summary. Given that these were the 4 or 5 of the key questions that were most important to the members of the CAC. Again, for myself, it's the housing, and if I could live with either of the Woods or the North River in terms of the details and what the buildings look like and how many trees there are, et cetera. I mean, that's important, but nevertheless, that you can adjust in the zoning and when you're doing the site planning and all of that. But the deciding as to who goes forward here and what kind of a project we ultimately get and what we zone for really depends, from my perspective, depends on how much housing and how much density is going to be placed at the transit station. And it's so that is again, I have a strong preference because of that. But if that changes, I don't. So I don't know how you reflect something like that, and everybody else has their own set of opinions. So I'm not sure there's this. I would argue there's my sense is that there's a consensus, sort of in favor of what North River has proposed at this point, but I'm not, I think it's because various people, the comments I've heard from everybody has sort of more, this is a little more important to some people and this is less for others, et cetera. So it's really the sort of favorability toward the North River at this point is a matter of adding up the people's preferences on the aspects of it that's most important to them. And I'm not sure we would all agree if we laid them out. I mean, I've been quite clear in saying that the retail issues mean absolutely nothing to me because I don't think they work. But other people have a genuine sense that this is important to them and that their preference is based to some extent on that. So I don't know how do you parse that all out? I'm not sure.
All right. We have 4 people who want to talk, so we're going to go Alex, then Lindsay, then JR, then Counselor Wheeler.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Echoing what Zach said, yeah, we don't really have, like the city's consultant, HRNA does, we don't really have a point system, but if we did, I feel like it would also clearly represent the consensus that's been proposed by the last 2 speakers. To Bill Valletta's point, yeah, housing is one of the big things the community has prioritized for this site. One of the biggest things they want to see. There are also other things, green space, community integration, just kind of being something to knit the neighborhood together, kind of give it its own feel. Housing is a big thing, not having too much parking. There's a lot of things we have to balance here where obviously each of us panelists has our own preferences and our own, opinions and knowledge that came in terms of ground floor feasibility for businesses. But we're also here to represent the community. And I feel like in that regard, yeah, the consensus does seem to be pretty overwhelming at this point, which is not reflected in this document. I was trying to figure out how to say what Zach kind of said. Said like, yes, this document is technically accurate. We want it to be that, but I feel like it also does not really reflect the magnitude to which we have kind of leaned up to this point. That's all I got for now.
Great.
Alex,
Lindsay.
you're muted, Lindsay.
Thank you. To kind of echo what Bill said, I think right now I have a strong preference for North River, but I'm also trying to keep an open mind to as what might come in the best and final. Mike, I guess a question here is, are we supposed to, in this memo, give our preferences at this point?
So generally the way I've been thinking about it is I've been trying to structure it because we have this best and final offer period and we're going to be asking for updates from the two teams. I've been trying to structure it as, okay, this is what we like about these proposals, this is what stood out, but this is really where we're looking for improvements to be made and making that really clear so they have a chance to respond to it. But again, we can say that and articulate something around like in general, based on the current proposals, there is a preference for the North River Leerink team. So we can say both of the, like we can essentially say there's a preference. However, Civic Advisory Committee members are eager to see updates based on the feedback provided in the areas for improvement section of the table, and show that openness to the proposals being improved.
All
Councillor
right.
Wheeler.
Oh, I think JR was before me.
Sorry.
JR, go ahead.
So the way I hear and the way I understand it, I believe there's a strong preference towards North River. I think that unless there's an unforeseen circumstances, such as soil, for instance, I think that we can live until we learn more about the risk factor. And I don't know how this will determine because at some point we'll have a recommendation. I'm not sure how much weight there is into their recommendation that we're going to that will come from our side. So I like the fact that we're using strong preference because I think that the difference between both projects are immense, from my view. So I just wanted to make sure that this is reflected properly. Thank you.
Thank you, JR. Councilor Wheeler.
Thank you. Going back a little bit to what Bill was sort of saying about what this document currently is, am I understanding right? This document captures the conversation we had in the process of the interviews last time, the questions that we asked, and the small amount of commentary we made. It doesn't seem to yet capture our perspectives on the presentations. Okay, so
the idea was, so this captures everything from the 22nd conversation, so from the first conversation, and then the goal for tonight after we did that debrief earlier is that we're now going to incorporate that into the table.
Okay, great. So I just want to make sure we weren't moving on with a confused assumption that the sort of current understandings. Okay. And again, to another one of Bill's points, it does seem to me like what this step of the process wants to be is more of a dynamic conversation with these developers. And I understand that's what the team is sort of structuring. I'm a little concerned that there's so few points where we can have this sort of dynamic. There's kind of one more big revision that we're looking at getting. Whereas, thinking from Wood Partners' perspective, it sounds like maybe there was a different set of desires among the committee as a whole than they necessarily totally understood from the RFP, and that's fine. I think you discover things by making something and making an attempt and getting feedback. I don't assume that Wood Partners, couldn't design something that does the things that North River Leerink's proposal does. And, I would hate to lose this opportunity to have, a significantly revised plan from them and also to have a revised plan for North River Lee Rank that we could then continue having this conversation about. Maybe if the process is just set, that's going to be the best and final offer for both of them, and it can be as different as they want it to be. I do wonder if, as somebody else, I forget who it was, said, for the sake of really trying to get this right for the city in the long term, I do wonder if there's any way there can be room for a bit more of an exploratory process, even if it's just one or two more points of conversation with these proposers.
Yeah, I guess two thoughts on that. One, the other consideration that we have to keep in mind is just the amount of work that we're asking development teams to go through in an RFP process before a selection of one has been made. So I definitely hear around like having additional touch points once a selection has been made. And I do want to be clear that there will be a lot of back and forth. Like there's going to be a lot of refinement of this, of whatever team is selected and what their proposal is. And that is something that the Civic Advisory Committee is going to be involved in. So I will say that. The other thing I will say though is that, I know this is essentially the last like structured touch point with the CAC in the current review process. We partially, again, we have three bodies to get feedback from. In this case, we have the CAC, the City Council, and then the Redevelopment Authority. So again, partially for the efficiency and like respect with the development teams, even that process takes 3 months. But we can add another touch point maybe after the best and final offers come in. We could think about having another touch point to get feedback then. It's not necessarily, I think it's difficult to ask to then make additional revisions, but it does at least make sure that we're allowed to respond to the feedback and that the SRA then hears how the Civic Advisory Committee is responding to the feedback.
Thanks.
Would people be interested in something like that? I would assume in general, yes, but I just want to, yeah. Okay. Let me follow up on scheduling and where exactly that would fall in the process, but it would be looking at something like late June, early July, for having something on.
And just
Are
from
there-
the chat, oh, sorry, Alex Taylor and Paolo also agree with Councillor Wheeler.
Before we hop into integrating anything that is different from the interview conversation we had, you can see my screen still, so you can see this front page.
Yes.
How would people feel about adding a sentence that's something, again, this is live typing. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, the headset died for a second. So having something like, based on current proposals, CAC members have a strong preference for North River Lyring's current proposal, or let's repeat it, based on current proposals. However, CAC members have structured their feedback as areas for improvement and will look to see how each development team updates their proposal during the best and final offer period.
And you might want to try turning off your screen. You're coming in a little slow.
Oh, it's choppy. We've been having bad connection in a couple of these workstations. I apologize. Is it still choppy?
It's better now.
Okay. How does text like this? Again, I know Zach is expressing like a magnitude, but I think given the kind of different feelings, I feel like this maybe strikes a balance. Like there definitely is a preference here for North River Lyring's proposal, but interested to see what they come back with. Okay. Perfect. So I'm going to, as the next step of this, shift us into adding any updates to the text in the table. based on the debrief we had of the interviews. I have the text next to me that just summarizes what we discussed earlier. Why don't I just kind of read through notes and see if what to add? One thing I will note here in areas for improvement for North River Lyric. So we noted most CSE members wanted to see a clearer site plan. We did get that clearer site plan, so I'm going to remove this. There was also a note about wanting to see phasing. I think that was not necessarily addressed, so I would maybe say most CSE members were curious to understand phasing across the development. I think that still accurately describes what we discussed. Through the different Wood Partners comments. So we have a piece about being responsive to parking ratios. I think that we already have the parking feedback on here, so they're going to get that feedback. Um, doo, doo, doo. One piece that came up was an appreciation that the Wood Partners proposal is in one shop. So I'm just going to add that point here. We have a note here for Wood Partners. CEC member noted it doesn't feel like the site design is well married to the surrounding community. I think we've probably expressed that in a little bit more detail throughout this. Reiterated a concern with the low residential density next to a transit station. Would be interested to see greater density, so we have that expressed here. So I will say I think a lot of the concerns from the Wood Partner side remain. Again, not a lot changed in their initial proposal to their interview, so it makes sense that we wouldn't greatly be changing what the feedback was. Is there anything else on the Wood Partner side we want to make sure is integrated before we look at the North River side?
And do you mean for all categories or?
Yeah, I would say yes, sorry. So across the categories. What were you going to say, Councilor Wheeler?
Thanks. I'm seeing there's the retail and community space section, and then there's the public space and tree canopy space. So I'm trying to see if between those, I feel like the need for more of an approach um, that is, making accessible civic space. I'm seeing that mentioned here. I feel like it could help to maybe put a note in the I'm getting lost here. The retail and community space. Uh, and this sort of bridges the sense of community space and green space. But I think there was a sense among several people that there was not an approach that affirmatively integrated with the neighborhood, or that had sort of a vision of civic involvement here.
When you say civic involvement, and Zach, I'll get to your hand in a second, unless it's about this particular comment, but when you say civic involvement, can you flesh it out a little more?
Yeah, I can feel that it's sort of muddy when I say it. Uh, I I think that the idea that I'm trying to find the right words for is that there was a concept with the North River Lyric proposal. Um, and I appreciate some of the things some people pointed out about, it's not necessarily going to be perfect in its sort of envisioning of this central green space, but there was a philosophy there, of, here's how this could connect beyond the people who live here, connect to the neighborhood. And that was something that I heard several people and myself articulating around an area for improvement with the Wood Partners proposal was um, where and how does the public get involved here? It could be that there's retail and cafes and that's it, and that could be good. But is there anything beyond that that could invite people to use this building who don't live here?
Zach Wilson also has comments. Zach?
Yeah, I think I had kind of a similar concern, maybe a little bit more narrow, in that I feel like it might be worth calling out, like not to keep singling out the private pool, but it seems like they are prioritizing um, private amenities for the people that live there, presumably kind of in hopes that they can like justify charging like 5K a month or something like that. Um, as opposed to things that really draw in members of the community that are in the area and not necessarily residents. And to me, I would like to see that flipped. And that's what I would probably say in the area for improvement. But I also think that Councilor Wheeler captured that perhaps better than I did.
Yeah, so I guess let me just call out the text that's in here currently. So it's several CAC members expressed concern with the space given to the pool and green spaces located several stories above the ground floor, particularly when the project was creating minimal new public civic space. They noted that they would prefer to see these amenities as public or used for more housing. I could add something to the end of this that's essentially or a clearer concept for inviting the public into the space.
Yeah, I think something like that would work well.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks.
So I'm going to cut this because it's captured at the.
All right. Are there any additional editorial comments from the committee?
And I know that again, we're over time a little bit, but I understand there's a lot of text in the table. So I don't want to go too quickly in ending the conversation. I want to give people a second as they're kind of bouncing in the text. We'll still look to end at a reasonable time shortly, but just want to give a moment.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, Ben,
One
where
thing-
did that text go that you just wrote?
Sorry, I cut that. I cut that text because I added it. And actually, I'll do track changes. So
Thanks.
this text here, and then one thing that maybe came up is so I'm looking at the comments also about the North River space. So just thinking about some of what people commented. So a CAC member mentioned disappointment, the decrease in the number of proposed residential units. So if I go up to the piece about general density for North River, so we do have a piece here. Several CAC members and members of the public express excitement about the number of units proposed, both for the creation of overall units and for the number of income restricted units that this would also create. They also appreciated that the team proposed achieving this density across several buildings. I think that is all true. Do we want to edit this at all based on the fact that they decreased their? I can add a piece at the end that says, however, based on the updated proposal, CAC members would still be excited to see more density on the site.
I think you should use the word disappointed that it went from 600 to 400, to express it in that way, that it's, that was a.
Alan?
Yeah, I just have a general comment, sort of on the back of that. Based on the fact that I just feel I'm about to run out of time to put on record that I feel like I'm one of the few people on the committee who hasn't been a fan of the increased density. And part of that in my reasoning, I'll just put it out there, and if we want to add it to the record for both, we can, but is with this proposal and adding that much more to the city, which everyone wants, my concern is a lack of ability for ownership, that these are all rental units that are subject to markets that will grow and grow and grow as the value of being near transit just gets out of hand. So I would be amenable to what the majority seems to be, that want to add more density, if there was a subset of that that was built to potentially go to own. Because I think that's how you actually develop roots in a community that stay invested, that stay interested in the type of civic spaces that the councilor would love to see there, that I'd agree with. But I think if it's a constant turnover of renters who are just trying to catch the wave in the market and be able to sustain it, that's not long-term growth for the city. So what disappoints me about projects like this and others is the lack of vision towards ownership, because that's what's going to sustain for generations. Again, however the committee would like to include that or not, I just think that's a valuable, that I would agree with that statement of disappointment that there's not more units available.
Yeah, and I will say that was in the RFP, and even just one CSE member referencing it is worthy of being in this table. So just want to be clear on that. I could add a point to both of these under density and general layout that says, you know, a CAC member, and if more agree, we can change that language at the beginning, but a CAC member expressed disappointment with the lack of home ownership opportunities and would be interested in seeing this added, and I can add that to both.
Again, I put it up to how everyone else would feel about that. I mean, it's just my thought on this, because again, I feel like I'm one of the dissenters, and the reason why I'm not is not because I don't want to see more people living in Somerville, but I just think if it is this transient, short-term living, it's unsustainable at the growth rates that we've seen rent. Because I have seen rent for a long time and how it has just disproportionately skyrocketed. Who's to safeguard this? And then, you get 100 more units that are empty, because that's not where families want to grow roots, and people who invest want to grow roots. So I just think the ownership is a huge miss on both of these. And if you want more, I would like to see more, but it has to be ownership.
Do other hands that are up want to comment on this particular point? Councilor Wheeler?
Yeah, just briefly, I just wanted to mention there is affordable home ownership. There's a whole structure around how that works. So if there were to be some number of units that were condominiums, there is a structure for having a percentage of them be affordable and be purchasable at discounted rates. I'm not exactly sure how that works with inclusionary zoning, and I'd be curious about that, but that wouldn't mean that we couldn't have 20% of the units be subsidized.
Inclusionary zoning does apply to condo building. So if there's a condo building created, then still there's like a set aside proportion. I don't know that it's exactly the same as rental units, but it is comparable. JR or Bill Valletta, are the comments on this point?
So this is clearly a statement that I do agree. So just make a point.
Yeah. And Bill Valletta?
Yeah, I agree with Paolo's analysis of this. I think his point is very, very well taken. My problem, I think, is that because Somervision, my strong focus on the question of how many units are going to be packed into this space here really is, if we can't pull off high density housing at this station with a site that the city already owns, we better scrap Somervision, because Somervision, this is the fundamental idea behind the whole transformation zones and the transit zones, et cetera. And to me, there's a fundamental, and so, what if I would love to explore Paolo's idea, but in the context of saying it's time to rewrite Somervision and rethink the whole way we're looking, we're planning and setting our zoning and our regulations for the future of how we're going to do housing and how we're going to do density
Sure.
and everything else in town. To me, it's a much more fundamental set of questions, and
Sure.
That's my.
For the sake of digestion within this feedback structure, I maybe want to divorce a little bit the concept of greater density with home ownership. I definitely hear what you're saying, Paolo. I think regardless, I'm hearing some agreement around interest in including home ownership opportunities as part of the structure of this project. From past conversations, I'm also gleaning that I think people would want to see greater density regardless. So I don't want to necessarily link those concepts. However, I will say try to include some note in the Wood Partners piece that at least one CAC member, and this was referring to your comment on the 22nd, was happy with the level of density provided. Again, I know it's complicated by you're saying you would take more density with homeownership opportunities, but I think they are for what they had proposed in terms of a rental program. Wanted to capture that.
All right. Any further comments on any portion of this?
I'm still reading through some of the, I'm gonna keep live making some of the comments just to make sure that we feel like if something should be added. Am I still cutting out a little bit, Ted?
No, you're good.
Okay. In terms of the retail and community space, so I did hear for North River a positive being that it felt like they understood what the neighborhood is looking for. So maybe adding that kind of comment. Several CAC members appreciation for the team's openness to discussing retail strategy and their approach of subsidizing retail space at 100 Chestnut, which is their project in Brick Bottom. I think I also heard a clear comment about the development team. So what I already have here, several CAC members expressed excitement about how the site could be tied into North River's nearby development. I think I also heard a very clear, several CAC members appreciated the thoughtfulness of the development team and the way they listened to priorities in the RFP.
Could you edit the word? Could you edit the word excitement there?
Word what?
The word excitement.
It's the first sentence in development team. Yeah.
Yeah. And excitement sort of overstates our interest in this. To me, I would use a little less emotional language.
Okay. Do people feel okay about that edit? We also talked a bit about the public open space for North River Layering. So I do want to maybe call out both positives and negatives. So CAC members seem generally excited. Some concern about the centrality of the courtyard space not being accessible, but also appreciate the amount of green space included. Okay, so CAC members expressed concern the central green would feel private. We're interested in how the development team can make the space feel welcoming.
Somebody have a comment?
one other thing I'm going to note here, because this was not in the original North River proposal, the appreciation of the access drive for the western portion of Building 84. I know Bill Mahaney commented on this. Because this is now included in the site plan for North River Lyric, I'm going to add this. I'm going to say they would be interested in seeing more detail just because it's not referenced in their proposal.
Paolo and then Shelley have comments.
So, Ben, did you write it down or did I miss it about when we expressed the concern about 24/7 access? Is that something we should mention? Is that sort of if it is an open public space, that courtyard, the safety concern?
I guess I will say that I think it's something that would hopefully be addressed, but I can still add it. So they were also interested in understanding or in how the development and eventual property management team would approach safety or security.
Shelley.
I was just noting in the on the piece about what's it under here? Retail and community space. Did they clarify? I don't think they talked about Trader Joe's. I know it was in that original proposal, but was it? I didn't feel like
Or Lindsay, I saw that you unmuted if you want to.
Yeah, they did, and they recognized that there was one in Assembly, and kind of said that they put it in there, I think, just without necessarily a lot of research. But we're also open. They talked about like the bodega or like a more local grocer as well.
Do we feel like it's worthwhile to still keep in that concern because that was in the initial proposal, but then we have the point here that they had an openness to discussing the retail strategy, and I think part of that was around local grocers.
I think so. I don't know, Shelley, if you have.
I mean, I think it's good to just add to balance it out the statement that there was other alternatives provided.
Okay, I think that captures a lot of what we discussed earlier. Um, is there anything else standing out about this to make sure we want included? Councilor Wheeler?
Uh,
Oh,
we haven't talked in this meeting yet about they do mention art space several times in their proposal, and they mentioned it in the interview. So talking about ground floor art space was also a promising type of community space.
I don't know that I have the correct spelling of the Earth space, but
I remember them using the phrase "New Earth School," but I had no context for what they were talking about. And I wasn't sure if they were talking about like an after school kind of thing or like a private school. I just had no idea.
I think they discussed in their initial proposal, like having basically a nonprofit partner that does environmental education. And so I don't know exactly who the participants in that kind of program would be, but that was the sense that I was getting.
Thanks.
Shelley, when your hand was up, was that an additional comment or just okay? Okay. Are there any other comments at this point? My other question just being, so I know we added this additional paragraph here. I've been using this kind of general structure at the start of a lot of these memos. Are people generally comfortable with the structure of this memo overall? Cool. People are going to be so sick of this formatting structure after this, but I appreciate y'all sticking with it. Okay. Amazing. Thank you for live editing. I know there's a good amount of text here. It's not always the most comfortable process, but I appreciate you taking the time to do it with me. Um, this is meant to encapsulate a lot of what we discussed. Obviously, it's not the end of the conversation. So there are going to be future points for feedback. I do want to say that, but I think this does well capture a lot of what we have discussed in these past couple of meetings. For the sake of the process and the way that it is like written in the plan, there is an official vote that needs to be taken. And so I am going to quickly put the vote language on the screen. So the official vote is to recommend Wood Partners and North River. Actually, let me describe this before going into this. The way that the process was initially structured is that it essentially was meant to, depending on how many proposals were received, the CAC was then going to kind of narrow it down. I see Bill Valletta leaning in, so I'm going to make this larger. The the idea was that if there were more proposals than two, the CAC would kind of do a first pass at narrowing it down to a top two. Those would then be sent to the council. The council could sub them out based on other factors. And so they could change who is in those top two. And then those two move on to the redevelopment authority. Because we only have two proposals, it's a little bit different. Like I'm really trying to focus us on the feedback structure. In this case, the recommendation around moving the two forward is, there are only two to move forward. So I understand that that's a little funky. But based on what that process was intended to be, the vote would be voting to recommend Wood Partners and North River Lyric Manager LLC as the two finalists in the 90 Washington Street request for proposals process, and to share feedback with the City Council and the Somerville Redevelopment Authority regarding the strengths and areas for improvement of each proposal. Are people comfortable with this language before? Well, Ted, do you want to do a?
All right, sure. We will now move to a vote.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay.
We'll move to a vote on the language presented on screen and on your screens as well. The vote is to recommend Wood Partners and North River Lyric Manager LLC as the two finalists in the 90 Washington Street request for proposals process, and to share feedback with the City Council and the Somerville Redevelopment Authority regarding the strengths and areas for improvement of each proposal. Bill Mahaney, how do you vote on this?
Yes.
Proposal? Yes. Alexander Taylor, how do you vote?
Yes.
Shelley Calder, how do you vote?
Yes.
Lindsay Allen, how do you vote?
Yes.
Councillor Ben Wheeler, how do you vote?
Yes.
Zachary Wilson, how do you vote?
Yes.
J.R. Dallara, how do you vote?
Yes.
William Valletta, how do you vote?
Yes.
Paolo DeFabio, how do you vote?
Yes.
And just for the record, Rory Collins had to leave before this vote. All right. Thank you very much. Ben, do you have any other matters to discuss on this agenda item?
Just to kind of wrap it up, we're going to share this feedback with the Redevelopment Authority and then also with the City Council for a meeting that they have on May 11th. So they're having a special session to discuss the two proposals. We're also going to be meeting with the City Council during that meeting in executive session, so a private session. And that's where we'll also bring in the financial portion of the offers. So I also want to circle back. We had made the note about having an additional touch point after the best and final offer period. So we will follow up about scheduling and setting that time aside so that when we have those updated offers, we can share them with CSE members and also get updated feedback.
Thank you, Bill. You're muted.
Yeah. Since I'm the oldest person in the room here, I want to express the sense of the committee, and I think I have everybody behind me to thank Ted and Ben for the work they did on this. You've done an extraordinarily wonderful job organizing this. And I think the outcome of this document, in fact, it's coherent, it makes sense, it captures what we discussed, et cetera. And this is great. You guys are terrific. Thanks.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much. All right. With that, we do have 2 attendees in the audience. I will ask if there's any public comment at this time. All right. I don't see any hands raised among the audience. So from there, we have on the agenda approval of minutes. I don't have any minutes right now for a review. I will have them for the next meeting. And so with that, I'll move to adjournment. Bill Mahaney, how do you vote for adjourning?
Yes.
Alex Taylor, do you vote to adjourn?
Yes.
Shelley Calder, do you vote to adjourn?
Yes.
Lindsay Allen, do you vote to adjourn?
Yes.
Councillor Wheeler, do you vote to adjourn?
Yes. Thanks all.
Zachary Wilson, do you vote to adjourn?
Yes.
J.R. D'Oliveira, do you vote to adjourn?
Yes.
Bill Valletta, do you vote to adjourn?
I do.
Paolo DeFabio, do you vote to adjourn?
I do, Ted.
Excellent. Thank you all very, very much. And I just want to thank the committee for your wonderful work these past few meetings. This has been extraordinary. You've done a great job. You should be proud of yourselves. And I look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. With that, I'll bid you all good night.
Have a
See
good
you all
night.
soon.
Good
Thank
night.
you. Bye-bye.